What have I been saying for literally 5 or 7 years at this point? That the SAT is a test of where your critical thinking skills are. Are you college ready in the sense, can you think on this level that the college will demand of you? And then GPA. GPA is a snapshot of what kind of student you are. Hi, it's Alyssa the College Expert. So many of you guys have probably seen MIT's most recent announcement. We are reinstating our SAT-ACT requirement for future admission cycles. Obviously, because of what I do for a living, I can't tell you how many people sent me this article the day that it came out and were like, oh my God, this is crazy. I also was like, oh my God, this is crazy, but also was very excited about it. Many of you probably remember I wrote an article when they first got rid of the SAT-ACT requirement, and my argument was that for kids coming from low SES schools, especially kids of color, who don't have great high school fundamentals, they are the ones who are really gonna pay. If you are a kid of color going to a school that isn't understood by the admissions office as particularly good, the only way that you can demonstrate your ability to compete at Harvard, at MIT, at Duke, at what insert name of highly selective school here, is by saying, hey, look, you may not be able to understand what my grades mean because of grade inflation, and you don't understand the role of grade inflation at my school. You may not be able to understand my strength of schedule because the counselor has done a poor job in writing up the report about what classes are offered at my school. But I can show you that I'm college ready by getting a high score in the SAT. And so that was the essence of my argument, that as we get rid of the SAT-ACT requirements, the colleges will still have diversity requirements, right? They're still trying to meet numbers for certain distributions of races on their campus. So what will they do? They will start taking kids of color who come from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, so more international students, and they'll start looking at kids' ability to pay, because that will help them get a sense of whether or not they went to good schools. Because as we know in this country, your education and the amount of money that your parents pay for taxes in that town are inextricably linked. So if your parents live in a place where they don't pay a lot of taxes, property values aren't high, likely you're not getting as good an education. And since we know that, then it's going to become an SES war, a socioeconomic status war, which then means that my kids who are coming from low socioeconomic status schools in poor neighborhoods with schools that aren't considered particularly good have no way to prove that they in fact can meet the cut and can compete at that level. You've probably heard me say before that I've talked to admissions officers at highly selective schools who have said that students who can't make 1,000 on the SAT or an 1,100 if they're planning to study STEM, they cannot help them. They cannot serve them. They cannot predict that they will be able to get to graduation because they've tried before and they have failed. So for those schools, that minimum requirement of 1,000 or an 1,100 on the SAT has predicted whether or not they will be able to serve these students. So there's a lot of data, right? I think at this point you can cherry pick whatever data you want in order to prove your point. There is data that says that the SAT is a positive predictor. There is data that says the SAT is not a positive predictor of success in college, of success in life. One thing that's really interesting that I learned recently is that the SAT is more strongly correlated as a test of critical thinking than almost anything else. And I was shocked, because I have been saying for years that the SAT tests critical thinking and that's pretty much it. When they're talking about college readiness, yes, there's content you have to master, but the content usually isn't the hard thing for students. Usually it is figuring out what the question's asking and applying the content correctly. So then when I was doing research for critical thinking, and I happened upon this article that was talking about how the SAT was such a positive predictor of critical thinking. And I was like, oh my God, I've been saying that for years. Absolutely, yes. So here's a way to think about it. The SAT is a test of how your critical thinking skills are right now. And it's saying, am I ready to go to college or not? Because do I have the critical thinking skills that will be necessary? And let me tell you a short story. There are so many examples of students that we have sent to great colleges, and we were so excited because we're like, oh my God, this kid got into this great college and now everything's gonna be great for her. But remember, it's not just to college, it's also through college, to and through. So what happens in college is they realize that they're super behind and that they don't have the fundamentals to meet where everyone else is. I actually was on the phone with Hopkins admissions officer the other day, and she was telling me Hopkins does a lot of work to make sure that the students that they admit are able to handle what Hopkins is going to expect of them. It's not easy, right? if you're struggling and you need remediation and you can't get through the basic fundamental classes, you will not have a good trajectory at Hopkins. And we specifically sent a student who came from a school that didn't have good science fundamentals. She wanted to be a computer science major. She was not able to major in computer science because she came from a school without good science fundamentals. She ended up fine. She's doing great. But the point remains, you can't come from a school that has poor science fundamentals and then go to a highly selective college where everyone around you has come in with this breadth of knowledge. In many ways, the way that Hopkins, this admissions officer was telling me, the way that Hopkins is using scores to understand students is saying, can they complete the work? And so this is what comes back to this question of like, does the SAT tell us anything? So now, what does all this have to do with MIT? So if you look at their letter, their statement that they put out, and I really like the way that they hyperlinked a lot of things. It's clear where they got all their statistics from, all their facts from. This is kind of a bulletproof notice to the world. And I think they did that purposely because they understand that many people perceive standardized tests as being a racist instrument. And so they wanted to be very clear that actually the reason that they were reinstating the SAT and ACT requirements was because they are not racist and because they feel like kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds are most likely to be overlooked. So two pieces of information that you may or may not know. During the pandemic, 2020 to 2022, when schools went test optional, the largest group of students that stopped taking standardized tests were Black and brown kids and kids who are first generation. And there's a huge Venn diagram overlap between those two populations, right? And so one of the things that he says in this article is we won't have enough information to be confident in their academic readiness. That is exactly the argument that I made. They don't have enough information. All they have is a GPA. And the GPA doesn't tell you anything because you don't know what grade inflation is like. If it's from a school that you don't have a good sort of synopsis, or you may not trust the synopsis that's written by the school counselor, you don't understand how to weigh that information. What I predicted when I wrote that blog is that the less we rely on standardized testing, the more unequal higher education is likely to become. Here's why. Elite institutions like the Ivies have admission quotas for members of historically underrepresented, socioeconomically marginalized groups, primarily Black and Latinx. By scoring above 1,000 on the SAT, low SES students show that they are college ready and can succeed at a highly selective institution. That's because grade inflation and a lack of familiarity with these less elite high schools that my students are coming from make their GPAs hard to understand for college admissions officers. So if they see a high GPA, they don't know if it necessarily means that the kid is ready for a rigorous college curriculum, because a lot of times in schools that are not elite and schools that are elite, they understand the extent to which this is happening. There's incredible grade inflation. So 4.0 doesn't necessarily mean that this student is going to be able to hack a college curriculum. And the admissions officers know that. So we will take away one of the few avenues that my students have to demonstrate their mettle and readiness to undertake a rigorous academic program. If test scores are eliminated from the equation, those schools, those highly selective schools, will simply take kids who tick off a particular race or ethnic box. And many will be international students who can afford full tuition, who went to great high schools that have prepared them for this rigorous college curriculum. Without knowing if the high school has prepared the student, the college is reluctant to accept that student, and I completely understand why. So the SAT provides this critical piece of information that a GPA cannot. Very few people look at the number of Pell eligible students that a college accepts or graduates, but that's where you'll see the change. So he talks about our ability to accurately predict student academic success at MIT is significantly improved by considering standardized testing, especially in mathematics, alongside other factors. There's so much data right now about whether or not the SAT, ACT standardized tests are a good predictor of success in college or not. You can pretty much cherry pick whatever data you want to make whatever argument you want. However, if we go back to that conversation that I had with the highly selective college admissions officers, and they were two separate schools that told me the same thing, 1,000 or an 1,100, and students scoring below those numbers on the SAT cannot make it through to graduation regardless of the amount of support they're given, that is exactly the same thing he's saying. Accurately predicting student academic success. So he knows that there's a threshold, and below said threshold, the students will not be able to make it. His third bullet, as a result, not having SATs, ACT scores to consider tends to raise socioeconomic barriers to demonstrating readiness for our education relative to having them, given these other inequalities. Yep. And you see what he says. We can't predict why these tests are so predictive of academic preparedness, But all MIT students, regardless of intended major, must pass 2 semesters of calculus plus 2 semesters of based physics as part of our general institute requirements. So they have a science and math heavy set of requirements. And basically, if you can't do the science and math, if you come in on that level and you don't understand what's going on, you will not be successful. So basically, everything that he's saying is tying together everything that I've learned sort of in separate places from the admissions offices. One thing that I want to say also, many people who think about the SAT and the ACT think of it specifically, strictly as a barrier. And they kind of feel like colleges are putting it out there to preclude students from being able to get in. I have a friend that I talked to the other day, and she said, I want you to understand how hard the admissions team is working to try to take everything into account and take a holistic picture. She said, after talking to them and watching them evaluate applicants, I truly believe that they are doing everything they can to really get a holistic picture of the student with all the information that they're given, regardless of socioeconomic status, what they submitted, what they didn't. Like, they're really trying their best. That heartened me, knowing that they are honestly, just like me, trying to do the same thing, trying to get as many kids of color to and through college as will make it. That makes me feel safer. That makes me feel like, okay, I can trust this process again. I can trust what these people are saying. So he says at the end, you are not your test scores. And for that matter, you are also not your MIT application either. You're infinitely more than either of these narrow constructs could ever capture. And I think what my friend said about Hopkins and what he's saying about MIT are the same. They are doing their best to really evaluate applicants. And so here's another way to think about it. We talked about the GPA and the SAT. So the SAT is 25%, GPA is 75%. You can think of these as kind of a threshold. If you want to get put in the, let's look at this person and decide if they can get evaluated for admission, if you want to get in that pile, you just have to get this SAT and GPAs. And so that gets you in the we will look at you pile. It sounds like from what he's saying, that's the only thing they're looking at. Can this person basically get through whatever we're asking them to do in terms of science requirements? And then once we know that they can, then we can evaluate their essay, their supplemental essays, anything they wrote, teacher recommendations, all of that stuff. And so this kind of goes back to a question that many parents ask me, which is talk to me about the primacy of the SAT versus the GPA versus the essay. Some people have heard, oh, I heard the essay is the most important part. So I would say the essay is the most important part. Once you get put in the file, it gets read, right? So there's read file and a trash file. You don't want to get in that trash file. So the SAT score and the GPA keeps you out of the trash file. Then your essay gets read. Then they start thinking of you as a person. They start taking a flat number and turning it into a 3-dimensional round human being. For me, that's really good context to know that the way that I've been thinking about college admissions is also the way that college admissions officers are thinking about college admissions. And everything's changed so much with the pandemic. And it's good to kind of come back and be like, okay, yes, this is what they're doing. They do have the best of intentions. They do really want to make sure that low SES kids have a great shot at getting into this place too. I was really heartened to read this. And I think the other thing to remember is that MIT is a fairly well-known, fairly selective university, right? MIT is arguably one of the best in the world, certainly one of the best in the country. And I think now that they've had the courage to do this and they've come out and they have a statement that is so clearly vetted, based in facts, based in statistics, other institutions will be able to come out and say, okay, we also think this. We were scared of coming out before because we didn't want to come off as racist, but MIT's made it extremely clear why this score is actually so useful. So now we have the courage to come out as well. So I applaud MIT's courage, and I think they're absolutely right about low SES students, and I can't wait to see other folks come out similarly. Also reinstate the SAT, ACT, because I think that's how we get our kids, our low SES kids, into college. And socioeconomic mobility, to my mind, is the best way out of poverty. So, thanks for watching. If you want to study the SAT or ACT with me, or you want to get ready for college, I do targets, reaches, safeties, help writing the college essay, getting your recommendations together, filling out the common, walking through the financial aid forms. Happy to do all of that. I or one of my tutors would be happy to help you. Reach out to me at Yleana.org or Socratic Summer Academy's website. See you soon.